All right, I'm here with my friend Timothy Halloran, and we're going to share a talk about the Venus Taurus second house archetype and the Pisces 12th house Neptune archetype. They're both very similar, they're actually octaves of one another, and we will each be speaking about these during the upcoming EA conference. So I'm going to be speaking about the Taurus second house of Venus archetype, a talk about self-value and tending to the garden within, and Timothy will be speaking about the 12th house Neptune archetype. So let's just start there. Timothy, welcome. I'm really excited to share this talk with you. There are many interesting pieces that we're going to be exploring together. Introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your talk and what you're going to be focusing on.
Thanks so much, Moshe. I'm super excited to be sharing alongside the other evolutionary astrologers at this conference. So astrology began for me around my Uranus square 21 and has been a ceaseless passion ever since. I've been practicing and teaching Jeffrey Green's EA for about the last decade now. And it has just, for me, been an exciting journey, probably beginning with the question as why is my life experience the way that it is? Why do we have all of these different experiences in life? So that way we can understand, why is my life? Why is everybody having such a unique journey throughout life? So I really embraced astrology as a way of understanding and celebrating our uniqueness, but also I'm very passionate about bridging astrology with other healing modalities to make it as useful and as applicable as it can be.
Beautiful. So I want to say too that this EA conference is bringing together many of the teachers that have been deeply involved in this work for a very long time. And your voice and your contribution to this work is just its own gift to the larger ecosystem of evolutionary astrology. So I'm very glad that you're going to be joining us and being a part of this greater ecosystem. Just so everyone knows, check out the description below. So if you're appreciating this talk today, check it out and you can enroll. The conference is October 3rd to 6th, I believe. So will you introduce to us briefly the purpose and the theme of your upcoming talk?
Sure. So, as I mentioned, some of my passion in astrology is in simply understanding what is all of this diversity, what are all of these differences. And so I found that understanding the zodiac itself is some of the most useful knowledge, real life wisdom that we can possibly gain. And I found that Jeffrey Green's work is just the most in-depth understanding of these core archetypes that I've, at least so far, come across in my life. So understanding the zodiac is understanding these different, well, from an evolutionary astrology perspective, different phases or processes of our own evolution. Now, on planet Earth, there's so much misunderstanding that my excitement in teaching the 12th house is, this archetypally speaking, is probably one of the most challenging to comprehend, probably one of the most confusing. And so we're going to discuss why that is. And the intention of my talk is to help discern, why do we have these experiences of confusion? What is the actual function of the 12th house? And as we know in astrology, the 12th is the final house. So this somewhat has to do with ultimate reality. This somewhat has to do with the ending or the be all end all before we begin a new cycle. Because, of course, in astrology, we see things as cyclical. So there's not really a beginning or an ending. There is this coming full circle. So the 12th house brings up the most questions in many respects. The 12th house is interesting. There's been so many interesting things said about the 12th house over, so many centuries from different cultures. So this talk's going to be about exploring why that is. Jeffrey Green said that Pisces archetypally is the most difficult archetype to understand. He also mentioned that the 12th house Neptune or Pisces archetype is said to contain all of the other archetypes within it. So there's a lot to do with paradox. There's a lot to do with
Mhm.
what is actually incomprehensible, what is ahead of ourselves that we cannot quite see, which is why the 12th house has so much to do with surrender or letting go. But this is, as a process in and of itself, probably one of the most challenging to actually speak about, to even form words to describe how do we surrender? How do we let go? Because it's almost like the process of the 12th house itself is to bring us into surrendering, to
Mhm.
bring us into letting go. How can we act or force or preconceive an act of letting go without going through it
Mhm.
itself?
Mhm.
So
So
it becomes enormously intricate and
yeah.
fascinating subject, but it will lead us into some of the vaster themes of life. What is the purpose of everything?
Mhm.
What is the purpose of our life? Why do we have different phases of life, different seasons, different processes? Where is all of this leading us to? And 12th house themes leads us into asking these types of questions. It leads us into contemplating what is love and what is ultimate truth. What is our relationship to the ultimate whole? Where do we connect with that which is greater than just ourselves? And again, from our perspective, we can't possibly see the all in all. We don't have eyes everywhere. We don't have ears everywhere. And yet we are connected to the all in some way, shape, or form. So interestingly, we know archetypally the first house, Aries, has so much to do with choice. And when we get to the last archetype, Pisces, 12th house, we encounter these themes of choicelessness,
Mhm.
or where we're meeting nature with a capital N, where we're meeting forces that we don't have control over. And so much of this discussion is going to be, how do we approach that? How do we approach the murky, um, the confusing, especially to do with themes around belief system, sacrifice, surrender, love? Uh, how do we align to the all in a way that can ultimately be healthy and inspiring? Because as we'll discuss, any zodiac sign, any house, any archetype, you get the full spectrum, best possibility and the worst possibility. And we'll explore this full spectrum in regards to the 12th house and Pisces. But at its worst, the 12th house can be the actual experience of breakdown of belief or a crisis of faith, um, or a melting down of what is true, what is real, or what is not real. And that is in itself the process and the exploration of the 12th, to discern what's real and what's not real. What can we trust? Where can we let go and surrender? Or where may that letting go, surrendering, and trusting actually be misguided or coming from a distorted idea or belief system, expectation, or obligation? So we're going to explore the full spectrum of all those possibilities, probably take a look at some historic chart examples to see it in the lens of soul evolution and get an understanding of the 12th house natally in regards to past lives, future lives, and what 12th house transits may pertain to as well.
Oh man, that was beautiful. Okay, there are a couple points here that I want to bring forward. You spoke to the idea of choicelessness and also this really important point around surrender is something we can't really understand. You have to experience it. And this quality of the 12th house Neptunian journey of like trust in what we don't understand, trust in what we can't see, trust in what we can't actually control. There's this is completely intangible to the mind that wants to be able to know the outcome, that wants to be able to form conditions and fixed ideas around the journey and how it's going to go and what's going to happen. This is such an essential quality, and what you're speaking to just brings up that sense of in such an essential way. This is about letting go of all of our personal convictions and ideas and surrendering to a truth that is not of our own making, but that we are also inseparable from. It's such a beautiful contrast to my talk, right? You spoke about the first house having a lot to do with choice. And the next developmental stage, if you think of it that way, is the second house and the Venusian archetype. And this is about the consolidation of my human survival, my life. I'm here, I exist, I want to exist, I want to be here, I have a body. How do I make sure I don't die? How do I make sure I preserve the basic biological reality of my existence? And this archetype is, in a sense, since an earth archetype is contrasted with water, has a lot to do with control. There's a quality of grace and receptivity where we learn to receive, because we need to be able to feel and receive in order to know that we're alive. That feels good, that doesn't feel good. Move away from pain, move towards pleasure. But on a deeper level, we are determining from within our own self what our values are. We're deciding, I want this. I'm hungry. What can I do to get food? It's a very basic biological, I'm alive and I'm needing to be thoughtful and conscious around how I'm establishing the basic needs of my own life. As I mentioned earlier, the Venusian and the Neptunian archetypes are octaves, right? And so we can describe that as Venus being the lower octave corresponds to the realm of relationship, right? Sort of think of it as, this is vertical, like more lateral, right? Or vertical, but either one, horizontal. It's both my relationship with all things in this physical realm. You know, I have a relationship to the things around me, relationship to the people, and this relationship is a dynamic exchange. It's a give and take. I'm consciously giving purpose and meaning to the people, places, and things of my life on a very relative and conditional level. You're in a relationship. Those relationships imply certain agreements, certain expectations. Ideally, each individual is in consent around that, and there's no like unspoken needs or expectations, which we'll speak about. But in every single relationship, even if you're just buying groceries at the store, there is a particular exchange happening between the person at the cashier and the person buying the bread. If I'm drinking a cup of water, there's a whole lot of relational dynamics happening in that experience. I'm designating a cup, physical experience, right? There's like an object here that I'm giving meaning to serve a particular purpose. And developing self-esteem and self-worth says, I deserve to have what I need. And it's not deserving from some kind of grandiose, like I deserve, it's like simply you deserve to exist, to live here, to have a body because you do. And so it's like an innate deserving from the point of view of you deserve to breathe air. You deserve to live. You deserve to be comfortable. You deserve to have whatever resources are relevant and necessary for your life. But there needs to be an essential sense of deserving and self-value and self-esteem, right? So in that Venus, Taurus, second house issues can easily correspond to all kinds of problems that we might face within ourselves, challenges around self-value, either self-interest, this deeper sense of I'm going to do whatever I want to do to make me feel the way I want to feel, which if we bring that into relationships, that can be a sort of, we're not being relational, we're just thinking about ourselves. But we can orient to all of our life from that point of view in terms of just moving towards gratification. Always wanting to be comfortable, never wanting to feel pain, always wanting to feel pleasure. That's like the more gross level of consciousness here. But on the other end, we can have deep issues around not having self-worth, not feeling self-worth, not knowing ourselves to be valuable. And then all of the ways in which we seek to compensate or seek a sense of value outside of ourselves through people, place, things, object, experience, sensations that will make us feel better. We all know that, right? Like typical journey, typical archetypal experience of I feel heartbroken, I don't feel good. So what are we going to turn towards? What objects, what sensations, what tastes, what flavors might we imbue our senses with in order to feel better? Or another person thinks that we're attractive or likes us, and how do we feel about ourselves? And there's a very biological reality to all of this stuff, right? All of this is deeply, deeply rooted in survival. I was listening to a talk recently. I was speaking about, in the archetypal heterosexual relationship, for a heterosexual woman to reject a heterosexual man sexually, to say, I'm not interested in you, but he's wanting to be available. For that man on a subliminal liminal level, right? Like sort of subcurrent, what that's communicating is you're not worthy to procreate the species, pretty much. Like that's like the more like subliminal biological imprinting that's coming through. Of course, not all relationships are about that. Most on a conscious level, in terms of what we're actually doing, aren't. But for many, many relational experiences, that's kind of like this deep sense of, I guess I don't really deserve to be here, right? I have no value then, right? So it's a very core signature. And what I'm excited to do with you here is look into this octave relationship. So I'll end this point with, you think about Neptune, that's a higher octave. Its relationship on a maybe vertical sphere, it has nothing to do with the comings and the goings or the conditional qualities of life. It's our relationship to ultimate meaning and the ways in which we allow for that ultimate meaning to manifest and express and imbue itself within our life, within our human experience, versus the meaning that we're establishing and affirming with the Venusian second house archetype. And they're very connected because we can actually get these confused very, very easily. As we all know, we can have this experience of associating the conditional facets of our life with ultimate meaning. And then we're going to have that sort of Neptunian 12th house experience of feeling deeply empty when that which we've given meaning to is no longer providing that same spark. That could be a relationship. That could be any kind of experience of this world that makes us feel like $1,000,000. We suddenly feel great and the flowers are growing, and then it's gone and we feel like there's no point in living. So these are very important pieces to be speaking to.
I can't wait to hear your talk, Ari Moshe. I can just already feel the richness in your voice and where you will be speaking from.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it as well. I'm also waking up as I'm speaking, so this is it's coming in.
I hear you. I hear you. Um, Again, I think some of the beauty of evolutionary astrology is the real depth and richness to which we get to comprehend the planets in the zodiac. And if we were to think about it, all life experience filters into these 12 signs. So we can imagine that each sign is fairly rich. Um, One thing I wanted to mention is there is a fairly common misconception, especially with people early learning evolutionary astrology, that we say, oh, well, Pisces is the last sign, or 12th house is the last house. So that's the most spiritually evolved sign or house. And of course, what we understand in EA is that you can't read the soul's evolutionary stage based off of the zodiac or the archetypes. So you can take every single archetype, every single zodiac sign to somewhat its most mundane level, the glory and pitfalls of that, as well as its most profound level. Because interestingly enough, I think that, again, the 12 for Pisces being all archetypes are contained within it. We're trying to bring all of these archetypes together. The real usefulness of astrology is understanding the zodiac. So to know what is a human being, what is a soul or life on earth, so that way we can acknowledge and celebrate that total diversity and that full spectrum of what is. So a lot of the rectification that's very useful to people tuning into this information is addressing some of the stigmas and the stereotypes around these signs. And I know there certainly are stereotypes around Taurus and second house, as there is 12th house and Pisces and all of that. And that's some of what we get to address in these talks that I think is really exciting, but also useful information, because you can almost flip these things back and forth. You can talk about how, well, I'll just quickly share that I think it's a common misconception. So we're going to discuss what even is transcendence, the 12th house Pisces theme. What is transcendence? What is sacrifice? Is it, letting go of everything as in a forced letting go, as in a discarding, which would be quite inauthentic, as our emotion mentioned. Real, sacrifice or surrendering is a coming into, is a somewhat embodiment in itself, as is the function of Taurus. So we can use our bodily somatic nature in a harmonious union with our own spiritual service and evolution. And that's what we're all trying to work out here, depending on our birth chart and what we're made out of and what we're working with. How can we bring in this proper balance? And I've found that to be some of the deeper work in what Jeffrey Green's put out there. There's this huge wisdom of polarity. Like we kind of get the worst out of any sign when it's not in balance with the opposite sign or house. So I'm sure that will be at some of the core of both of our talks, talking about how do we really bring in real value, well, by having that
Absolutely.
balance with Scorpio. We're probably going to have to talk about death, and since Taurus has so much to do with preservation, what is these things that we can't ultimately preserve?
That's right.
And 12th house transcendence is going to bring us into this contemplation. What is actual transcendence? Is it a kind of, I want to spiritually evolve, so I'm going to not feed myself, or am I going to try to bypass my body or senses? But we have these greater examples from all of human history. For example, the Buddha is almost an example of Taurus type enlightenment.
Mm-hmm.
By finding that middle way, that Goldilocks balance, and also soothing his body and senses with a bowl of rice through which he achieves enlightenment. So we get to talk about these different parts and pieces and then how they all come together. And that's going to be a part of my discussion, but that's going to be a part of what you gain from the whole conference as well.
Indeed, indeed. Let's tune into the second house, 12th house relationship. Um, there are so many important pieces here, and I think what's valuable is just understanding the how significant and important and pervading relationship is in all of our lives. I'm going to share a couple of things that we were talking about that I took note of here. And this is highlighting the difference between conditional and unconditional relational, right? So the Venus Taurus archetype corresponding to a very conditional quality. Literally, it's like, I need to get what I need, right? And if we're in a relationship, we're going to be listening. This corresponding to the actual reality of listening to another person. What do you need? What do I need? Is this going to work? What are our agreements? The absence of a need being met isn't necessarily an issue, because that need, if it's there, we're going to find a way to get it, right? It's all about us taking a sort of responsibility for attending to our life and learning how to enhance and share value, enhance value in other people's lives as well. So in this perspective, this has nothing to do with love, right? Like true love, and we often get the idea of love very confused. We think of, finding true love or the person that's going to meet all of my needs. And this is where I really think there's an underlying confusion amongst these archetypes. Jeff Green's spoken about the 7th house, archetypal Libra 7th house Yod, to the 12th house Pisces, 2nd house Taurus, right? Basically two in conjuncts between Libra and Taurus, Libra and Pisces. And the crisis, the challenge, the stress of that Yod is basically we're in a Libra relationship, and I'm projecting all of my inner needs and my value onto this relationship, and you are becoming a de facto replacement for God, for meaning, for what's actually essentially always true. And so we think that we're going to access some sort of higher, unconditional, pure love through another person being this thing for us that will meet all of our needs and make us feel a certain way, or that we will be that for another. And that's not true. And it doesn't mean love isn't real and that love isn't expressed through relationship, but we are differentiating between Taurus and Pisces. So unconditional love gives, and it has zero interest in what it gets. Like love in the true sense only wants to give because there's truly no difference between the giving and the receiving. And there's no concept in from the point of view of love of looking at this from a truly unconditioned place of am I going to lose something in giving? Right? Am I going to sacrifice something that I need? Where the energetic of sacrifice comes in is where confusion comes in because there's no true loss in love. There's only giving. It's like one of the principles in A Course in Miracles that um, in the miracle being given, both the giver and receiver receive the miracle. There's no expression of love that isn't shared in all directions. But then that brings up the question, okay, I can unconditionally love this person, but what am I going to do with my needs or me getting what I want? And this is a big part of navigating personal relationships and the spiritual journey of surrender and acceptance of what is that we're navigating between these two archetypes. Before I expand on this, do you want to say any more to this?
I'm curious to know if there's anything to do with relationships in the astrology when this promotion is being aired. I think that
Or
tends to,
are there any relationship talks you mean, or
if
in the
it's a
transits?
collective theme at the time that we're meeting and airing this discussion, because we've got Venus and Libra on the South Node with a whole
Oh, is
stunning
that will it be on the
planets right
South
now.
Node?
Yeah, yeah,
Well,
coming up
yeah,
right
we
then.
got a lot of sexual talks, like a lot of like I'm giving, Venus Taurus is a lot to do with sexuality. Mars, we have a talk on Mars sexuality. Jason Hawley is going to be giving a talk specifically on the sexual archetypes in astrology. So yeah, I think there's a little bit of a theme there.
Yeah, for sure. Um,
The
it's
Libra
it's
on the South Node, yeah, there we go.
yeah. I love that you brought up that Libra and that Yod, since that's why this discussion right now is so interesting. The compare and the contrast between, in and of itself, talking about Venus and Neptune as a subject is just such graduate school spiritual homework in and of itself. It's like, how do you be Venus, a human, and be a spiritual being? That's sort of what we're all here to figure out. And in no way am I going to pretend to have all the answers for the 12th house Pisces balsamic phase archetype as well. A part of what we'll talk about is that this is what all spiritual evolution pertains to. So it's like we're consistently discovering more of what love or God or unconditional this or that, or how to embody that is, because that's the real question. It's like, we all, for example, I shouldn't say we all, but a lot of us Pisces age, we grew up hearing about Jesus, ultimate role model. That's who we should be. So we should all put ourselves up on the cross. That's part of what my talk's going to be about, is
Hmm.
where is that an authentic spiritual path? Where is there authentic spiritual sacrifice? And then where have we developed pathologies over centuries of this being the monocropped belief system that somewhat's been forced upon us generation after generation to come? So that's been the real question. How are we supposed to be this human? We've got needs. We're not quite like Jesus. Most of us, we can do the water test. If we can walk on water, that's sort of how identical we are to Neptune, right? So I think that, this is a process for most of us. Not that we can't walk on water either, because Christ said we can do all the things that he has done. But this theme around needs and certain needs that we can have met and certain needs that we can't have met, that is by design part of the experience of life, is we don't have control over that, right? That's part of my passion in being an astrologer, is I want to help people diagnose what are your needs, understanding your life, your soul's evolution, and all of that, and then how can we get these needs met. That's a huge part of the human struggle, is to do that.
Well, I mean, just speaking to that, I think this is where a lot of confusion comes in. Just thinking also of just the spiritual modality that we're coming from for several centuries. Even within the Taurus second house archetype, we have the hermit or the monk, even. Right? That 12th house, second house is very much a monk, right? Meditating alone in their own spiritual world. It can be very easy to greatly simplify our idea of our needs to the point where it's, I don't need anything, right? I'm just here to simplify and shed. And this can become very confusing because it's sort of easy to bypass and go to a place of, well, I don't really need to get my needs met. I don't need to feel comfortable. I don't need to get the nutrition that I need. Because on one level, it's easy to go there. And some people are a little more wired karmically to kind of have that orientation, right? If it's been a pattern of letting go of the self, there might be some confusion and difficulty around, well, how do I integrate and tend to the idea of having needs while not sort of negating my own spirituality at the same time? That's a really big part of our learning and discovery. And if you think of, you mentioned polarity, the second house Taurus archetype as a polarity to Scorpio kind of says, from one angle, this life from a scorpionic eighth house point of view is about death. It is about evolution. It's like all a big letting go. Nothing that's come is gonna give you ultimate fulfillment. And there's a lot of facing our own psychology and turning the inner compost, taking responsibility for our own inner reality and being willing to let go over and over and over again to be reborn. But the second house isn't wanting to be reborn. It's wanting to make sure it doesn't die in the first place. You know what I'm saying? Like, so there needs to be some sense of, from a spiritual angle, some trust that my life has value, that the conditional fact of my body, of being here and sustaining it, has a purpose. And that can actually be, believe it or not, hard for a lot of souls to reconcile with. Again, we can have people that are maybe, they have no problem with the archetype of self-interest and making sure I always get what I need. But for a lot of souls in the spiritual path, I think this is a very difficult area. How do I reconcile my individual human biological reality and not let that either convolute or confuse my spirituality nor deny it?
Absolutely. And this goes again back to what is real transcendence, because if we use the monastic example, there's a certain type of person that says, yes, I want to make my life totally about God, so I'm going to give everything up. And that isn't necessarily the end of the game. We may have to come full circle back to our humanness and back to our biology. So this is where we encounter this disillusionment of what's true and what's not true, and what do we trust in. I can give the example of, a monk offering their food, say in a Indian temple, to a god or a goddess, and the belief is that food will become spiritually charged. And there's a story of a woman who ate the rotten food because it was spiritually offered, and she gets almost sick and almost
Oh, yeah,
dies.
yeah.
So that's the type of experience we have
Right.
in 12th houses, these necessary disillusioning experiences. So to make sense of all of these discrepancies, because ultimately Pisces is the all in all, which does bring all of these things together. So there's not actually a contradiction between the second house Taurus and the 12th house transcendence. Taurus has to do with what you do have control over,
Mm.
because we do have control over some parts of life. For example, most of us have control over the limbs of our body, not necessarily. Most of us have control over the types of food that we're eating, though not necessarily the air that we're breathing. So in regards to relationship, Taurus specifically has to do with the relationship to ourself and what can we provide to ourself. And that brings up a really interesting point, because for each and every individual, there will also be circumstances to which we do not have control
Mhm.
over having certain needs met. Now, a part of this will be perhaps a part of our spiritual discovery are those actual needs. Because this is a big Mars, Venus, first, second house exploration itself. A part of what Jeffrey Green says, we're born via desires, carnal desires, and a part of how we spiritually evolve is we either eliminate or exhaust those desires, which could sound something like, I thought I wanted that, and wait a minute, I don't know if I even really want that anymore. On a deeper level, I've realized that's not actually true about who I am. So first of all, we've got to filter through what are our actual needs, what needs can we provide to ourselves, what needs do we have that may be authentic needs like food, water, and shelter that are not being met, because we need to get very practical 3D and real about those needs that are not being met. How do we communicate those things? How do we be real about those things? And simultaneously, there's this experience of life where sometimes we simply can't. We may not be able to have certain needs met. Instead of a vow of poverty that a monk may take in a kind of forceful, preconceived way, there are plenty of people struggling in actual poverty, for example. So, some of the theme we'll be exploring when it comes to 12th house Pisces archetype is this paradoxical, or at least seemingly paradoxical, interconnection between where we seem blessed and where we seemed cursed.
Mm-hmm.
Because oftentimes where we seem cursed becomes our hidden blessings. And that's closer to what actual transcendence is, instead of the forced sacrifice that can be naive, premature, and, oh, I really love this person, so I'll just give my all in all to them, before we realize that that was a mistake, because that person could be depleting or unreciprocal, and there could be so many more people that we could be serving. So, what's actually the spiritual thing to do? 12th house, highly Pisces people, it's almost like their whole lives is oftentimes wrapped up in this type of exploration and discernment.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's such an important distinction. The yearning and the deep need within that 12th house Neptune archetype is for one's life in its entirety to be linked to meaning. You give the example of, someone eating the blessed food and getting sick. And it's such a fascinating point, because at the same time there's a story of the person that ate the rotten blessed food and got better. You know what I'm saying? Like, they got well. It made them, they healed their chronic disease with this rotten food. And it shows how this quest for meaning and truth is so deep. We can't just blindly have faith in it. Because you're going to walk in the water and you're going to drown. But there's a real difference, like an authentic distinction between this unconditional faith and trust, where Jesus says, in the Course in Miracles, there's that line: say to the healer who has healed himself can say to the mountain, move, and the mountain will move. Right? Everything I can do, you can do. It's like, what is the path towards that? Like, what is the path towards that absolute devotion and trust in what is essentially, when we speak about this archetype of truth and what is essentially true, we're saying this world and the rules of the body of time and space, like none of these things from a Piscean point of view represent absolute truth. They're not bad or wrong, or right. It's like we can't demonize it or deny it, but it's like this is just a dream of a dream. And to actually awaken to actual reality, we then have that absolute faith to know that there is no danger. And we're not concerned with outcome either. But there's such a profound like distinction between what for many of us is this endless search for meaning, wanting to be saved, hoping things will work out, hoping I'll get better, hoping the next relationship will be the one, hoping my body condition will be healed, versus the actual experience of knowing with absolute certainty, without the need for any kind of evidence, that God's will be done. And even that isn't so concerned with outcome. And it's like you were saying in the beginning, there's simultaneous no concern with outcome, and then absolute certainty in healing. And walking this path is one of, we can only experience it, we can only give ourselves to it. And the suffering, the challenges, the pain of this human journey is kind of unavoidable. And this is a part of where we're all, by necessity, on this path of learning what is true, what in this world has true meaning, what can we really surrender to. It's like we all want to know that there's something more meaningful here, that the suffering and the pain, the difficulties of our life have some kind of higher purpose. There's some sort of deeper thread of unity and healing that's at the core of all of this. And we just deeply desire and yearn to know that this is true. Like, we're seeking to have enough faith that we know that we're safe enough to surrender. And if we're making it up, we're gonna eat the blessed food and get sick. There's a story that I've often shared with Neptune about, I think I heard this once, from Bhagavan Das, actually, It's an interesting character. Um, he went somewhere and saw in India a man, meditating with this coconut that was painted as a deity. And there's like this beautiful glow around the coconut. And he said, "Wow, who is this deity that you're praying to? It has this amazing glow. I've never seen this before." Something like that. And the man said, "Oh, it's just a coconut," and threw it against the wall and broke it. It's both just a coconut and it's God. And figure that one out.
Since we're talking about Venus and Neptune being octaves of one another, I've got a question. Um, do you think there's a interconnection point to sort of, if Neptune is this ultimate meaning and Taurus and Venus is kind of the earthly container to hold or preserve that meaning, is there a way to bridge or have together the two? Certainly we know that
Hmm.
this can be deceiving or misleading because you can dress something up to not necessarily be what it is in essence, Neptune. But can there be a correlation between Neptune, the essence, and Venus, the container?
It's such a beautiful question to ask. I think there is. And what comes to me is it starts in truly earnestly wanting the best for another and knowing that what's best for another is innately also best for you and best for all beings. It's orienting from the attention of one, your healing is inseparable from my own healing. Um, Loving you and wanting the best for you is inseparable from wanting to know and have the best for me. That true authentic metta, that loving kindness. And this may or may not mean within the context of any relationship or circumstance that our personal needs are being met directly by that individual or in the conditional ways that we've otherwise wanted or expected, right? And that's where that unconditional love can feel like a sacrifice or a loss in a relative sense, but not in an absolute sense. It's just that the loss of our expectations of how we wanted things to end up, but to truly bless another and then to want our own life to be in service to another. Again, we need to discern between, one of the notes that I put down from when we're talking is when to say no. you know because from a typical Venusian Libra point of view, it's like, no, I'm not going to meet every need of yours, and we have to know how to say no. And if our self-esteem is confused, we might think, if I'm pleasing them, I'm going to be liked, so we won't say no when we should be saying no. This unconditional love is truly wanting what's best for them, which may or may not mean they're going to get what they think they need from us. It's so transcendent of all of the ways in which we project value and meaning on our relationships and conditions. And it might temporarily, even in some contexts, feel like separation. It might temporarily feel like loss or feel like I'm not getting or they're not getting something. But our work being anchoring ourselves in trust and love and not actually wavering from the innocent of truly wanting the best for another, truly blessing another with our life, even if that doesn't look a certain way. And I think that can just be really difficult. It's difficult from the point of view of all of the meaning that we've placed on things being a certain way. Yeah, what would you say? I'm curious your thoughts on that.
Well, it brings up so much because even when we discuss wanting the best for another person, how can we know what truly is the best for another person? So again, this act of surrender is ultimately to tune us into something beyond just ourself because that's necessary. From our vantage point, we cannot know even so much of ourselves. It's like we need that higher
Yeah.
vantage point, other people, higher ups in certain ways, even to see ourselves with any clarity. So it's just such a rich discussion because Taurus is like, we want to bring that into our container in some way, shape, or form as a reminder. And I think that your connection point there is a beautiful one. It's like we want to use our environment, things, bodies, tools to remind us of what the ultimate journey is that we want to offer our self back in some ultimate way, which, by the way, is going to look different per each and every individual. So even the example of why did one monk get healed by the rotten food and why did one monk get sick by the rotten food? Those are my favorite types of questions.
Yeah, I love it.
Because to
I love it.
me, there has to be an answer. There has to be a reason. It's not just like, oh, well, this person has more faith in this. It may not be that clear or simple.
Mm.
It could be way more complex than just that. So yeah, it brings us back to asking these larger questions. Why, you know, does it seem like some people are more walking on water than others? A 12th house Pisces theme has to do with loss. Why does it seem like some people live a life of more of a consistent experience of loss or letting go or one thing after the next, after the next, after the next? That can be a Neptune or a 12th house type of experience. And then that can lead one into the deepest challenging points of life. That's what I like to call the wandering in a desert experience. And I think interestingly, you have to do that in the Taurus way as well, a bit, where in order to know yourself, you've got to have enough space. You've got to have enough separation, Aries, Taurus, to know your internal value system as separate from anybody else,
Mm.
to be able to offer our greatest gifts back to another, because every single person's going to be born into a unique nature, which I can't say I know we chose. We throw out generalities, like some people like to say we chose our parents, or in evolutionary astrology, we say that our soul chooses via evolutionary necessity, which certainly makes sense to me. But we all have these very unique circumstances. So, what that offering back, we have to discover first, and will not be the same as everybody else's. So, maybe one monk has a power to be able to bless food, and another monk, that's just not their gift or their power. We can't expect ourselves to be capable of doing all things. That's part of the humility of embracing our humanness. That's also the usefulness of having a birth chart, is we can have that sort of cosmological mirror that's reflecting back, oh, this is our gifts. And in a Taurus type of way, at least I can ask this question to you too, but at least what I've found in my years of working with clients, that what we're born to be is the same as what we like, is the same as what we're
Yeah,
passionate
yeah, yeah,
to be, is the same as our soul's evolutionary
yeah.
journey, and is the same as what we ultimately unfold into some offering back to the whole as.
Absolutely, yeah. I find that so. There's a teaching in A Course in Miracles that I'm reminded of, which is miracles should be involuntary, and that miracles are natural extensions of love. And what that really means is what you're saying. We have no clue what other people really need, much less what we really need. And we don't consciously select the parameters or the terms of, that's basically playing God. The delusional idea that we know what's best for another, and that we're going to take it upon ourselves to determine what they need, what they get, what they don't get. I think that the true surrender to love is in the recognition I can't judge. I can't put myself in the false place of understanding, and how could I know? How can I know the greater plan? How can I know the full scope of this soul's journey and what's best for them? And that surrender to not knowing allows us to then be in this relationship, almost like Pisces, Neptune being our divine mother, father, that deeper sense of I'm going to trust in this vantage point that is completely beyond, like, I'm a 4-year-old. I don't really understand how the world works. I'm going to make sure before I just make my own decisions, I'm asking my parents for guidance. It has that similar quality. We really can't depend on our, unawakened, narrow understanding. To this point of, I love this example, this inquiry, like, why do some people get sick and some people get healed by that food? When I was in my early 20s and I was kind of like a young spiritual enthusiast, very excited about all that I was beginning to realize and remember. had this experience. I was actually in Israel at the time, and I met this man who had a limp in his back. And I knew a little bit about energy healing, but I never really practiced it or learned it. And I asked him if I can do some work on his back. I didn't even know how I framed it. There was no, it was very innocent. And I didn't have a technique. I just paid attention to the feeling. And he was, limping for a whole week. Like back was totally out and he was completely healed in that session. And I was blown away. Like, wow, how did that happen? And my first thought was, I need to learn more about this. So I ended up taking a Reiki class and got really into that. And that time where I took the Reiki class, I was walking to people on the beach, asking them, Rotsa Reiki? Do you want Reiki? Everyone got healed. Any problem anyone had, healed. Every single issue that it was like healed right away. It was really powerful. I was charged. Long story short, there turned a point where I then began to get sick each time I did a healing. And I would get very tired. And I began to lose my energy. And that magic, and I don't know why that magic was there. And I don't know why that magic, I had my own interpretation and sort of insight into it, but it was a very powerful experience of kind of living on this cloud for a while where miracles were happening. And I was just like, wow, I can do all these cool things. Maybe there's a little bit too much ego, too much of me in it, too much of, oh, look what I can do. But that same capacity at some point was completely lost. And I would just get very, very tired. And just for me on my own journey, it kind of brought me back to here I am telling myself I'm going to do these healings for people, but I don't actually know my function, right? It brought me back to like, okay, that capacity was there. Now it's not. I can try to get it back, but why am I here? Like, what's your will for me? That's kind of where it brought me in the end.
I think that's such a great example. Um, and I do think that this is going to be extremely relatable to those who tune into these talks, as I know what you just shared is very relatable. Stereotypically, I know it's a bit of a generalization, but stereotypically, people tuning into this conference, into EA, this or that, are interested in helping other people, interested in this healing journey. So, this disillusionment, which we'll be talking about, is a necessary experience. It's absolutely this 12th house phase. But something I'll be talking about is that this process never really ends. We go through pendulum swings of, and it's like we could even speculate different reasons as to why this happens. We don't totally know, it's like past life this, past life that, this or that, you know, moving on to a different season or phase. There could be all these different reasons, but we do witness this pendulum swinging almost universally. Every person on a spiritual journey necessarily goes through these spiritual disillusioning phases. And I think that's some of the most important takeaway is we don't want to berate ourselves or be critical on one another for going through the spiritual disillusionment as if that were a loss of faith or as if that were a loss of spiritual connection.
I really appreciate that. Yeah.
Because that's probably the first thing we go to when we go through that experience, And I don't think that's quite true. I think the reason why we go through that whole process is to lead us into something of greater significance than us just simply having control over everything.
That's beautiful. Yeah. It's similar to, in a relationship that there are these moments where there's great affinity and love and connection and the magic is there, and then days where it's not, right? And how we want to hold on to these moments of grace where everything is flowing and we feel connection, but then there are these falling out moments, falling out of grace from one another, falling out of grace from our relationship with the divine. And I just really respect the point you're bringing forward, because it is very easy to kind of be like, I had it and I lost it. What am I doing wrong? How am I off the path now? It's a very common temptation. I think many of us, once we're on this spiritual path, we can even have the memory of moments in our life where there was deep awakening and deep clarity, and everything was magical and beautiful. And then, years later in our life, we're in the rut, it's just hard. And it is an ebb and flow. And I think a part of the journey is not grasping onto the experience, or again, it's like not grasping a condition. That's a paradox of awakening, right? Like it's not a particular experience that you're looking for. We're not looking for a particular quality of magic, and you can't grab it because it's going to go away as soon as it came. This brings me back to the importance of sort of when we really think of that Taurus second house Venus from a spiritual lens, there's a great teaching in it to be stable and grounded. Fundamentally, I'm here right now. Where am I? What do I need? Do I need to take care of do I need to get more sleep? Do I need to work out? Do I need to eat more food? Like a very practical, basic biological, I'm here, this incarnation still hasn't ended. So this particular journey, this template of experience has not completed. That was hard, but I'm still here and continuing to live. And I think we can lose a sense of life having any, in the deepest extreme, especially when it comes to just the disappointment that life can provide, where all the meaning that we've given is then dissolved, like the sandcastle that's washed away. We can have difficulty with that will to live. And that's a very deep and sort of dark part of the 12th house. It can be this loss of like, what's the point of living? This sort of even a total cold apathy, it's like, look at all the crap that's happening in the world and all the suffering. It's like, what's the point? Why? And we can really internalize this disappointment to such an extent where we give up any sense of meaning and purpose. And that isn't to be judged, right? Because for many souls, that loss of meaning might be the next step before a real surrender, It's like, apparently I'm disappointed because I don't know what this is about. I guess I should stop trying to figure it out myself. That can be really beautiful, but it can be dangerous too. If we're relative to that, the lower octave, then what's the point of me being here? What's the point of my life? And it's a real thing that we even the sextile, right? Between, the 12th house, Pisces, Taurus, it doesn't necessarily mean it's all going to be fluid and easy and graceful and beautiful and harmonious. It could also be, it could be very easy to stop putting forward effort in our own life. It can be very easy to let go of participating. It's like the garden is overrun with weeds. Oh, why bother? Instead of just picking the weeds and continuing to work at it.
Easy come, easy go, right?
Yeah.
And that's such a highlighted experience. It's like we're challenged in that experience when we meet the 12th house or Pisces, because how much should we take control over? These are the real questions that there's no easy answer for, much like how we gave the example of the rotten food. We would never want to give a one size fits all to prescribe a certain way of doing things when it comes to that type of complexity in life. So even while Saturn's transiting Pisces these years, this is one of the themes that's coming up, is we're asking Saturn, how much do we take control of a process versus how much do we honor that process by how much it's outside of our control? So much of what we'll talk about in the 12th house Pisces, it's really going to be focused on the 12th house, is also creativity, because creativity comes back to this fundamental dynamic much in the same way. To be inspired, to really create amazing music or amazing artwork, is that something that we chisel or force out of something? Do artists go to music school and then think, I'm going to compose this amazing song with in this notation with G flats and half notes? And it's like, no, we're inspired, we're possessed. We become overcome by something. We're not grasping or taking control of it. It's almost the job of the artist to learn to do that, which is why being an artist, especially in our current culture, day and age, where there's timelines and due dates and pressures, it's a very challenging job. How do you access that creativity if you can't really force it? It's almost the job of the artist to learn how to forget, to learn how to let go. And we'll be discussing so much paradox when it comes to the 12th house Pisces, because it's going to be a both and in so many situations. It's like, yes, don't just merely be focused on yourself, but you've got to focus on yourself if you want to take care of others at the
Yeah.
same
Yeah.
time. And if you want to paint an amazing painting, you've got to not be super attached to a particular image or idea, because you'll end up blocking your own creativity or getting in your own way. But you still need to show up in front of the blank canvas, and you need to put your hand on the paintbrush, et cetera, et cetera. So it's really this divine balancing act.
Mm-hmm.
And there are parts and pieces to it. As much as there will be parts and pieces that we don't know, as we're evolving, we are also learning and gaining knowledge simultaneously. Why did you have that period where the healing went so well? Why was there the challenging period that came afterwards? I have no doubt that you will find more and more reasons as your life unfolds without having to try to find that
Yeah.
forcibly. It's like
Yeah.
this is a part of your life's unfolding. Much in the same way, we don't force open the springtime flowers prematurely in order to get the beautiful scent and the beautiful flowers. There is a natural process of unfolding that we learn to honor. And in that paradoxical sense that you just so proficiently described, we can't hold on to that, but we can't totally let it go either.
Yeah. Beautiful. The quality of grace in art is such an important piece. I'm glad you brought that forward. Because if you just think about the embodiment of the Venusian Taurus, and the I can't control it, but I love it, and I love you, and I surrender to you, just like the devotional nature of this Neptune 12th house, it invites us, it impels us to infuse our life with beauty, with grace, even if it's a complex, painful beauty and grace. It invites and impels that embodiment, because sometimes it's we need to. Like sometimes it's like the artist path, it's because there's a need to imbue our life with that relationship, with that. Otherwise, the opposite of that, they say depression is the opposite of expression. And when I heard that recently, I was like, wow, that's great. You know, the opposite of that is, what's the point of any of this? And we can actually have, when you think of these two archetypes in combination, especially, some of the most beautiful and inspired art and creativity and music, because it's on a deeper level how we're reconciling with the ungraspable and still trying to kind of ground our roots and our life in the meaningful. All the while, we can't articulate it, we can't possess it, we can't fully understand it.
It is interesting because there is this, we are learning, we are gaining spiritual wisdom. It may not be the same as all topical left brain wisdom, but this greater wisdom to understand what is life, what is the relationship between all things. And so part of what I'm hearing is it's almost to get to the high octave of Venus, to get to the best of what Taurus and Venus can be. Venus has to know what Venus is.
Yeah,
Every
yeah.
part and piece has to know its own function. So the shadow of Venus or Taurus can be superficiality. And it's as if that superficiality results from Venus seeing itself as the all in all. But when Venus knows its actual function, place, or position, which means that this body contains our soul, which is really pretty mystical and profound, but it's also temporary and it's also limited. That's where we can create a vessel that's not superficial, that's holding more of the all in all. So it's like when we know all of the parts and the pieces, we can surrender to it. We can understand what's going on, much like we can ride a bike without having to overthink it. And that's kind of what this whole spiritual evolution seems to be about as well, is this returning to what is this original nature that we had to go through all of these disillusioning experiences to sort of unwind or unwrap ourselves back into.
That's beautiful. The opposite is true too, how our physical life can be the embodiment of total confusion and loss. It's in the same way that with Neptune Pisces 12th, you can escape through drugs and alcohol or whatever. In Venus Taurus second house, you can avoid your feelings with sensation seeking. So you can bring those two together, and it can be the archetype of really putting your head in the sand, really doing whatever you need to do to avoid feeling, to avoid dealing with the pain and the difficulty and the irreconcilable confusion of reality. It's just that's like literally the very opposite energetic of this art and grace that we've been speaking to. It's coming from the same place. It's like this is more than I can hold, more than I can possess, more than I can understand, and I don't want to deal with it. Versus this is more than I can possess, more than I can understand, and oh mercy. Like what else am I going to do with that? It's like I can't control it, I can't run from it. I think that's often what gives birth to the deepest art and beauty. And also, through that realization, we acknowledge the utter poetry of life that's always beyond our grasp. And this can really open our hearts. It can actually open our feeling body if we're really willing to not try to control it or understand it. So, Timothy, I've really enjoyed this. Are there any final points that you want to bring forward before we bring this to a close?
I just appreciate the opportunity to discuss with you today, to promote the upcoming conference. And I feel a growing excitement to connect with the other astrologers and to share with some other like minds. I know that we could talk about this stuff forever. It's such valuable discussion, and one that I think is, again, relevant to a lot of people who will be tuning into this talk on our channels and the upcoming conference as well. So no, I think I'm going to put on the brakes, even though there is so much that I would love to talk about and share with you. But I do hope that it continues to unfold in a divine, beautiful, and inspiring way that neither one of us may have any clue what's going to happen at this particular point.
Sounds right. That's beautiful. I hope this was useful for everyone watching. And let me quickly share the screen here and just show everyone the conference page so you can get a sense of it. Just briefly go through all the imagery. We have lots of really cool talks coming up during this conference. There's Timothy. Cassandra is there. There's that sexual healing with Jason Holly, another one on Mars. Venus and tending to the inner garden. Health crisis, karma yoga, secondary progressions, and a political one. That's going to be fun. Looking at some USA stuff and working with trauma through evolutionary astrology with Patricia. Yeah. So check it out in the description below, jwgaea.org. And yeah, thank you again, Timothy, for joining me. And I hope you guys will all check out the conference and hope to see you there.
And thanks so much for putting it all on, Ari Moshe. Appreciate you.
Absolutely.